Hello everyone, this is part 2 of our ACP video, and it focuses on the credentialing process and how to use Kaizen to help with your credential. I have on the line my colleague Rachel Boothby, and Rachel is an expert on the ACP process. Hi Rachel.
Hello.
Within this video, we will focus mainly on the credentialing process from the trainee and trainer's point of view and what needs to be done within the system. So Rachel, I think the first thing we should discuss is the credentialing checklist. Now, all users should have a checklist on their dashboard, and the checklist will be relevant to the curriculum type that the trainee has. So I can see Nick ACP has a adult and ped credentialing checklist because they're under the adult and ped curriculum. And this is the checklist that they will be using to credential. So Rachel, do you mind explaining what the checklist is?
Yes, of course. So the checklist provides guidance on the minimum evidence required for credentialing, including the competencies, presentations, and procedures for which a mandated assessment is required. As part of your credentialing application, you will be required to identify the single most appropriate or relevant item or items, if more than one are indicated, that you wish to be considered as the primary piece of evidence for each element of the curriculum, and then link that to the appropriate section of the checklist. We do recommend that you link evidence as you progress through training, rather than leave it all until you're ready to submit your application, your credentialing application, as you'll be able to replace linked evidence with more appropriate evidence as you go. We do have PDF versions of the checklist available on the ARChem website for you to download for reference only as a guide, but please complete the actual checklist on Kaizen itself. You will notice that not all curriculum items are included in the checklist. Therefore, you shouldn't rely on the checklist alone, but please always refer to the curriculum and the guide to ARChem Emergency Care ACP Credentialing published on the college website to determine what is required and to guide you in your personal development. Please ensure that the appropriate checklist has been assigned to your portfolio for the curriculum against which you're intending to submit your credentialing application.
Thank you, Rachel. What I will do now is just go through some of the checklists and just show them practically some of the examples of what they can do in the curriculum. Sorry, not in the curriculum, in the checklist. So let's start off with, let's say, structured training report. So I've opened the structured training report and we can see that the goal description explains what it is exactly you need to link to this area of the checklist. So we can see it says 3 structured training reports at yearly intervals indicating how the TACP or ACP is making progress. So each area of the checklist has its own goal description, which we hope will explain clearly what needs to be linked and how many pieces of evidence needs to be linked. Let's go back to the dashboard and I'll open another area. Okay, so next let's look at major presentations. And within major presentations, you will see we have a number of competencies. Now, the goal description says consultant summative assessment using generic summative CBD or specific mini-KEX for each presentation. So within each of these, you would link one item, which would be your primary item of evidence for each of these areas. And again, we just ask that you follow the goal description to note what needs to be linked. So that is the process of linking to the checklist. And we expect you to complete the entire credentialing checklist before you submit your credentialing application. So we want users to be aware that they do not have to link to 2 areas of the checklist. So the first area is this bit that says logbook output curriculum item rating. So when we open that, we have a goal description. It says all competencies, presentation, and procedures have been reviewed by the named education supervisor and are satisfactory. We do not expect our trainees to link anything to this. And as you can see, it says no event targets are required. ACP is not required to link evidence to this category. It's just something for you to be aware of, that we don't expect you as a trainee to do anything with this. Your supervisor will go through it and mark this as achieved. We're going to mention that later on, how supervisors do it at the end of this video, but that's just something that we want you to be aware of. And also the final checklist item, which is your curriculum evidence. This also is not required to be linked to by the ACP. It's something that will be signed off by your supervisor. We've discussed now the credentialing checklist, so what users are aware that they need to do for it. But I think it's also important that we discuss the academic declaration.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
So, let me just show them how to find the declaration, and then you explain what it is. So after you click to create an event, we ask you to scroll down to the very bottom of the page, and there's a form that's called RChem ECACP Academic Component Credentialing Declaration. It's quite wordy, Rachel, but let's open it. And this is our declaration form. So Rachel, would you like to explain what this is and how to use it?
Yes, of course. So all ACPs wishing to apply for credentialing must have attained a formal advanced practice qualification at level 7. And this can be a minimum of a postgraduate diploma, but can be a full master's. And the subject must be related to advanced clinical practice. The advanced practice programme must contain modules covering history and examination and diagnostics and clinical reasoning, although the titles of these may be different depending on the modules that you have taken. In order to demonstrate how the learning outcomes of your completed modules fulfill the learning outcomes required by the college for credentialing, you will need to complete this academic component credentialing declaration on Kaizen and link it to the academic competencies section of your checklist. So within this form, you'll need to map the relevant learning outcomes from your studied modules to the individual RChem learning outcomes identified in the declaration. And you'll need to do this by providing the name of the module and the full text of the outcome.
So Rachel, you just mentioned that we expect our ACPs to complete this form, but what would happen if someone had already completed it as a PDF from our website?
That would be absolutely fine. If you have already completed this as a Word document that you've downloaded from our website and saved it to the document section of your portfolio, you can link that document to the checklist. You don't have to duplicate what you've already done into this form.
And Rachel, all the guidance as to what needs to be linked is within the form, correct?
That's right.
So Rachel, what are the requirements for the mandatory life support certificates?
Okay, so all mandatory life support course certificates must be valid on the closing date of the application window to which you're applying for credentialing. And those dates are on the college website. You need to upload all your certificates to the certificate section within your documents on Kaizen before then linking them to the life support courses of the checklist. Now, just one more point is that due to the pandemic, we know that ACPs have had difficulty in booking onto courses to certify or recertify in some of the life support courses. So currently, if you've been unable to certify or recertify due to the pandemic, you can still apply for credentialing, providing you are able to show evidence that you have a place allocated on a course within 6 months of the date of the credentialing panel. So if you are then successful in your credentialing application, we will just hold off that final credential until you have successfully completed your course. So we don't want anyone to feel that they can't apply just because the pandemic has prevented them from recertifying.
What I've done now is I've logged into my NIC ACPs from the perspective of an educational supervisor. So what you're seeing on screen now is what the supervisor will see of the trainee's account. And I think it's important for us to go through what we expect supervisors to do, and then we can look at that within the checklist and also within their curriculum. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yes, of course. And this is obviously applicable to ACPs themselves. So prior to submission of a credentialing application, the portfolio of evidence must be signed off by the named educational supervisor to confirm that they have examined all the evidence and believe it is complete and meets the standard required. And within Kaizen, this sign-off process has now been incorporated into the checklist. And the named educational supervisor is required to mark each section of the checklist as achieved once they have reviewed the evidence.
Okay, so let's see how you do that. So as a supervisor, what you do, you would, as you can see, there are different elements of the checklist. But let's say I've gone through and I've reviewed career pathway CVs. I'll click into that. I've read the goal description of what I expect the trainee ACP to submit. And I can click show more. I can see one bit of evidence has been added. I can see the evidence and I'll be able to click to download it or click preview to see it if it was an assessment form, etc. So I've done that and I'm happy with the evidence that's been provided and that the credentialing checklist, well, at least this element of the credentialing checklist is ready for the credentialing panel. So I will go in, click mark goal as, I'll click that. And then you have 4 options. You only need to select the top option, which is achieved, and then a comment. The comment's not necessary, but we can just say that this has been achieved. Click mark goal at the end, and then this has now been changed to achieve. And if we go back to the dashboard, we can see that the career pathway has now been changed to achieve. So at the end of the educational meeting with your supervisor, once they've gone through the entire checklist before you submit to credential, each element of your checklist should be changed to achieved. Also, Rachel, one thing to note is that we would expect this to be done only in the final year right before submission. Is that correct?
That's right. So the sign off by the educational supervisor is the final action to be completed prior to submission of the credentialing application. And just one other thing to mention, as we referred briefly to it earlier, that from the ACP's point of view, not all sections of the checklist require evidence to be linked to it. And that's namely the logbook output or curriculum item rating and curriculum evidence. And for those sections, the educational supervisor is required to confirm that curriculum item ratings have been tagged to all presentations, procedures and competencies, and that appropriate evidence has been provided for all areas of the curriculum within the maximum number of items permitted, including the correct assessment type where mandated.
Thank you for joining, Rachel. I hope our viewers have found this useful. And if there's anything that hasn't been covered in this video, they should also recap the first video that we sent out. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to contact us at acp@rchem.ac.uk. And if you have any ePortfolio queries, please feel free to email us at eportfolio@rchem.ac.uk.